Happy All Saints Day, everybody. If you survived Halloween last night. Our first bonus speaker this morning is Janice Swab. We know her from a long-term member of our chapter and also for telling us about some of the wonderful trips she's taken around the world. Janice has spent her professional life teaching biological sciences, mostly in North Carolina, here at Meredith College or at NC State occasionally. But she's also traveled to many countries to teach under Fulbright grants in Egypt, Sudan, Zambia, and India. And she's also traveled to China and many of the countries of the former Soviet Union as an exchange student through the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. She's a botanist and has spent many years traveling to all the places that Charles Darwin visited in his trip around the world and ended up writing The Origin of Species. And that's just a summary of her career. It goes on 2 or 3 pages. She's here this morning to tell us about seeing the ugliest plant in the world. And Janice, I want to tell you that in 1994, J.C. Rawson wrote up a list of things he wanted to do the rest of his life. And on that list was a lust list of seeing the plant that you were going to talk about today in its natural habitat. Unfortunately, J.C. didn't live to see the plant. He died 2 years later. So you'll tell us about it. Also, there's a variegated form of it too. So please welcome Janice Swab.
Thank you. I want to begin by saying, let's just think for a moment of all the things that J.C. Rawson did. I didn't realize that that was one of the things that he wanted to do, but it certainly is worth doing. I have a few things over here on this table. I didn't realize that it was going to be so far removed from the speaker, but that's okay. We're carrying our voice with us. I have a couple of copies of Scientific American, the latest copies of Scientific American. We'll see why in just a minute. I also have one of the most interesting books ever written called Ugliest World. I went to a great deal of trouble to get this, and just so I could show it to you. And many years ago, when I had a chance, and I've forgotten where in the world I bought it. It was not Namibia. I had not been to Namibia before this trip, but the flora of Namibia, and of course it has Welwitschia in it. And this picture is something I will refer to later. And this is J.D. Hooker's report on the first discovery of Namibia, of Welwitschia. And it was not in Namibia. The first discovery was actually reported from Angola. And we'll look at that for just a minute. So just a few little show and tells up there. But if you had been sitting in your living room, reading your scientific, your latest scientific journal, which was being published then as well, Scientific American, and on February 22nd, 1879, you would have read the following article: A wonderful tree. The plant illustrated in the accompanying engraving, and that you'll see over there, is perhaps the most extraordinary vegetable production in many respects on the face of the globe. Not the way we write these days, but seldom, if ever, has the discovery of a new plant created such an amount of interest in the scientific world as did this. In the year 1860, an Austrian botanist, Dr. Frederick Welwitsch, of course we say Welwitschia, Welwitsch, while making explorations in southwest tropical Africa, it had not been, the country of Namibia had not been named at that time, while making explorations under the auspices of the Portugal government, came upon an elevated sandy plateau in the southern part of Angola. here, his attention was at once attracted to a number of curious objects rising from a foot to a foot and a half above the surface of the soil, varying from 3 to 14 feet in circumference and having a flat, somewhat depressed top of a dingy brown color and appearing more like large stools or small tables than any living plant. When his amazement at beholding such a scene was over, Dr. Vilvich, his first proceeding, of course, was to try to get some. It is said that when he realized what he was looking at, a plant that he had never heard of and no one else at that time had heard of it, because you know that the native people who lived there, because they knew, they called it, I'll tell you later what the name they called it was, didn't count. It's only when a Western scientist sees these things that it counts as having been, quote, discovered. It is said that he fell to his knees, speechless, at the sight of this plant. And today we can do the same thing. But he had no idea. He had no idea how to name it, how to place it in the classification scheme. Those were the days of classification, and you had to put it in a classification scheme first, and then you could talk about it. But he couldn't. So he gathered up some, sent it to Kew Gardens to J.D. Hooker, and said, we wouldn't do this today, would we? Describe this plant. Get this plant into the literature. You're the only one who can write this well. And so Dr. Hooker studied it, and decided that he would send it to his friend Charles Darwin. And Charles Darwin said, when he sent him a message back, remember, Darwin was not a botanist, but he had wonderful powers of observation. He said, it's the Orthorhynchus of the plant world. Well, what is an Orthorhynchus? It is the duck-billed platypus of Australia, a mammal that lays eggs. What? And so he was saying, this is just as strange. And he was making an observation, meaning that I don't know what this is. And the result, the article goes on, the result of Dr. Hooker's labors was the subject of one of the most interesting papers ever read before the Linnean Society. And that's the reason I have that thick paper over there. The whole thing was not read. It took me 3 hours to read it. And but it was the first description for the layman who is interested in plants. As we have stated, the Welwitschia rises no higher than a foot or so above the surface of the soil. We know now, having studied these things for more than 100 years, that in fact the tallest one they've ever found would come up to my shoulder. So they do grow taller than the 1 foot, although most of them, I'll show you. And it penetrates the root, penetrates several feet into the ground. In fact, they thought that all the water that the plant could get was coming through that root that penetrated into the ground. If you live around here, there are lots of cones in the road now. There's a lot of construction going on. Think about the plant as an upside down cone. It gets thinner and thinner and thinner as it goes down under the ground. And as it's above the ground, you see this round plate-like structure. And if you look at it carefully, I'm going to, I think, I'm going to advance this just to show you where we are in the world. I carried, oh, here it is. I carry my pointer with me. It comes from teaching in developing countries where they ain't got no technology. And so I'm not sure we have any here. Sandy to the rescue.
Well, he said just,
I'm just the warm up. The band is coming later.
he just said. Appreciate having a podium light turned on. Is there one? Be a podium light. No. Is this?
But it is confined, we know, to an area that is about 1,000 kilometers long, along the west coast, along the Atlantic, from Namibia, southern Namibia, to into Angola. Well, hello.
He told me to wiggle.
Oh, did I? Oh, did I turn it off?
No, he said the cable's loose. So I was just trying to wiggle the HDMI. It's on here. I
Anyhow,
can go get.
I'm gonna just very briefly tell you about my trip to Namibia while we have some time. This doesn't count, Bobby, on I went because I wanted to see the Welwitschia. And I went with a group called Noble Caledonia. It's a wonderful expedition company, and we went to South Africa, to places I hadn't been in South Africa, and then it ended in Namibia. And in Welwitschia, it was so I just pushed the one on the right. Okay. Okay, so you see the Namib Desert. This dry, it's the smallest, driest, oldest desert in the world. And that's one of the reasons that Welwitschia hadn't really been found, was because it's a very difficult to travel in, especially in those days when it was called Southwest Africa. Now, of course, it's called Namibia. So it's worldwide distribution is right up the coast, right into Angola. And in fact, the first discovery that Welwitsch made was in Angola. Later, it was at just about the same time. It was also discovered in Namibia by a man named Thomas Baines, and who is the artist who drew this rather artistic rendering of Welwitschia there. And so we were going to see the Welwitschia. We were going to the national park. I knew about the national park. I knew what the Welwitschia was supposed to look like and all that stuff. And here we were. We were on the only road that goes into the national park. You don't build roads in places like this. And so we were on the road, and boy, I was just ready to see the most wonderful and largest known Welwitschia in the world. It even has a fence around it so people can't take parts of it because, you know, somebody would want to have a piece of it. And so here we were, and suddenly we were in small vans coming to a stop. So it's okay, maybe who knows why. Except that above, ahead of us, this huge earth moving equipment was at work. And obviously something was wrong. It had rained. It does not rain in the Namib. However, when it rains, it's a really terrible thing. The road washes out. Terrible things happen in terms of people being able to get from one place to another, like for example us, and they said we cannot go any further. And I thought, oh my gosh. So they turned around and said, we're going to find another population. About 30 kilometers down the road, they came to a spot. And you look out over there, and you see Welwitschia. They're not the most wonderful Welwitschia in the world, but I'm not complaining, because we did get to see the plant. We got to walk around. look at different ones. And so what I'm going to do now is to use these plants in this area to teach us a little bit about Welwitschia. Remember, it's not like anything else. It looks like it has cones. It does not have cones. It has cone-like structures. And there's no such thing as a male or a female cone. You don't want to hear this because it's in the literature. Male cones, female cones, there's no such thing. But because all the terminology early on, well before Welwitschia, was based on animal reproduction. There had to be sperm, there had to be eggs. There had to be things like ovules and all of that. So we get the terminology for plants incorrectly, but it gets the point across. So that's what I hope to do, is to get the point across. So all of these little structures here that sort of look cone-like are producing pollen. They are producing pollen. They're producing gazillions of pollen grains. And if you look carefully, you'll see that I'll show you a better one, but right here is the trunk. It's woody, and it looks like a kind of a plate. And out of this trunk comes two leaves. They can be, as the plant grows, they will become, the leaf will become broader because the central part becomes broader. And the leaves flap out in the desert and get beaten into pieces, and it looks like lots of leaves, but in fact, there are only two. And they grow from this woody structure. And they grow the entire life of the plant. Two leaves. That plant grows 1,000 years, those leaves are 1,000 years old. The plant grows 1,500 years, the leaves are 1,500 years old. Nowhere in the plant kingdom can you find anything even remotely like this. And they take on very unusual forms, but it's still a trunk with roots and leaves. That's about the only thing you can say that is like all the other plants. And so I'll show you some examples. These are not the biggest, not the best, but they're Welwitschia. And I use my slides because I didn't want to take slides that I hadn't seen. Because how can you be sure that they're the same thing? Okay, what's different here? What's different here are the cones, not all those little cones, but these larger cones. And these are the quote female cones. They're the seed cones. They're the ones that will produce the seeds. What pollinates these cones? Well, they decided that it had to be this insect that crawls all over these, and that there weren't any that day, of course. But they decided it had to be this insect that crawls all over the place, except the problem is these plants, male, I'm using male and female just to get the point across. The male and female are not on the same plant. They either have the male cones or they have the female cones. I'm going to call them pollen cones or seed cones. That way I can hold my head up in society. And so the bugs that are crawling around on this can't fly. So how are they going to get the pollen from one plant to the other? So obviously the wind might be involved. Even today, there's controversy. But aren't those beautiful structures there? They have bunches of seeds. In fact, a plant can, not this one because it's not big enough, but the bigger ones, can produce up to 10,000 seeds in a single season. These seeds germinate like crazy. They are easy to get established, except when there's no water. How are you going to establish? So it's about 10% that even get a chance at establishing in the very, very rare rains that come. And sometimes they don't just come in one fell swoop, but they will stay around for a few days, or the soil will stay moist for a few days, and then the seeds can get their good start. And then if they can get down, if the roots can get down far enough where they can get a little bit of water, they can survive. But survival, when you've got survival problems at that level, you got to produce a lot of seeds, and they do. I'm not exaggerating when I say 10,000 on a single plant and there is where the pollen is produced. So this shows you very well that the top of this plant, and here is the trunk, the so-called trunk. It's not a very big trunk, but that's okay. It's still a trunk. And what happens is that as the new seedling grows, the top dies, and the leaves grow from the side of this trunk, and they keep growing. That's where they grow. Doesn't matter if this dies. Doesn't matter how many things eat on it. Doesn't matter what happens to the leaves out there. The leaves are still living and growing throughout the life of the plant. I know that my time is close, but I thought that I would at least show you a little bit about the plant, which is so unusual. If you look at the leaves are like gymnosperm leaves, but the way the cones, quote cones, are developed is more like angiosperm, at least at some point. I'm not going to try to go into the details, you don't want them, but the point is, you can't make this thing an angiosperm, i.e. flowering plant, or a gymnosperm, a cone-bearing plant, because it really doesn't follow the rules for each one. And as soon as you try to figure something out, you find out that you don't know. It's an amazingly wonderful. I'm going to show you. It's just to show you what it looks like around in these areas. Do you see anything inviting there? It is bone dry, and when it doesn't rain, as I said, for decades, sometimes. It doesn't, this is not, of course, where Will Witcher is, because I was just taking these pictures along as we went. But that's what the desert looks like if you were in the true desert, if you're in the Namib. Just to show you the diversity of scenery, it's just amazing. And so, but that's the road that as it went in this particular area. But you can see what a big rain would do to that road, and that's what it did, and that's the reason that we didn't get to go. So, just in what I can say in 15 minutes is, don't look for anything that is normal, quote, in terms of other plants about Welwitschia, because it isn't. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to think that it exists. But along the way, and I'm just gonna take 1 minute because you really have to hear this. We stopped and they started gathering rocks and bringing rocks. And I thought, well, okay. And they're covered, not covered exactly, but they've got lots of lichens on them. And that's the close-up. There are over 300 species of lichens growing on rocks in this Namib. How did they get there? How did they spread? It's believed because, and I haven't said anything about this, but fog from the ocean, it's just like our west coast, where you talk about the redwood forests that are covered by fog most days of the year, at least for a part. They are in these areas where there's the most fog coming in. And every day, you know how what lichens look like when they're nice and fresh and wet. Well, that's the way they look in the morning. By the end of the day, being sunny all day, they're crusty again. So every day they're responding to the fog that comes in. And I just think that's wonderful, even though it's not a part of the Welwitschia concern. But thank you.
We'll take questions at the end for both.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chris, we might have to have you come wiggle. Chris, come wiggle while I go ask for technical help, okay? Well, he just said the HDMI cord is loose, so can you make that go up there on the screen, please? I'll go get it.
What is this? Oh, this is a PDF?
Yeah, here.
How annoying.
That's okay. That button
This one
right
here?
above the plus.
Yeah, there we go.
And then full screen
Full
mode.
screen, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't do that.
Yeah, I know. It's different. Why is the screen?
Is that your first slide? Oh, you
know
know
what?
what? We probably can't do extend. It's on extend, so we just need to do duplicate.
Okay.
Whoops. The cursor.
It's over there. Yeah, it's on the other screen. Yeah.
Which side is it
pull
on?
it to the. Yeah, looks like
I don't even
far
see it
left.
over there.
Yeah, it's right at the bottom of the screen.
I don't even know what side we're on.
Now you're.
I hate extend. There we go.
Yeah. Okay, there you go.
That should take care of it. Now let's get rid of the thing up there. Whoops. I got rid of it.
Yeah. No.
I don't know if that can go away.
Where's the mic? Okay. Good morning. Thank you, Janice, for that talk. Appreciate it very much. Our next two speakers are Abby Arena and Ben Helde. Abby is passionate about gardening and travel, and when she travels, she often finds herself traveling to gardens. She loves flowers of all shapes and sizes, and with a special fondness for alstroemeria. Abby previously worked at Longwood Gardens and at the Scott Arboretum at Swarthmore College. She's now enjoying the chance to learn about unique flora of the Southeast for the first time. Ben Helde worked in numerous horticultural institutions across the United States and is now the plant records specialist and taxonomist at Juniper Level Botanic Garden in Raleigh. He's fascinated by many plant groups, but has a particular interest in hardy gesneriads, ferns, and the family Ericaceae. Abby and Ben are here this morning to talk about a trip they experienced last summer in Japan for 6 weeks, seeing both gardens and natural areas. Please welcome Ben and Abby.
Let's go. How do I make it go away?
I want it to go away. That's a good idea. Oh, yeah.
Right there. Oh, can you grab that to the bottom too?
I tried.
That's okay. It's recording because it
Yeah,
goes in like.
okay. I could do more.
Hide.
Hide video panel.
Hide floating meeting controls.
There we go. All right. Figured it out. All right. Good morning, everybody. As Bobby mentioned, we'll be talking about our trip to Japan that we took this past summer. It was a very different climate than Namibia, much more vibrant and green. And we were there for pretty much the hottest season. So similar to here, but somehow even more humid, which is surprising even to us. And yeah, I'll advance. Oh, you actually use this.
Okay.
It's not worth it.
We have to click it.
Okay.
So thanks, Bobby, for that introduction. And like you said, my name is Abby. I'm a recent transplant to the Raleigh area, moved here from Philadelphia, where I was at the Scott Arboretum of Swarthmore College before. Beautiful place if you haven't visited. Prior to that, I was at Longwood Gardens in their 2-year professional horticulture program, where I learned a bunch, met Ben, and we came up with this crazy plan to go to Japan together. And I'm really happy that we did. And so, yeah, I am really excited to be a part of Piedmont NARGS and to be here talking with you all today and to just become more involved as we get comfortable here. So thank you so much for inviting us to talk and looking forward to telling you about our trip.
And I'm Ben. I met Abby at Longwood, like she mentioned, and completed my bachelor's of horticulture at Temple University in the Philadelphia area this past May, while also working at the Morris Arboretum, where I took care of the fernery, which is a very exciting job. So I got to water that fernery top to bottom every day, and spend lots of time alone with the ferns. And before that, before coming out to the East Coast, I was grew up in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle, and spent a lot of time in institutions out there doing work with rhododendrons and other cool plants. So yeah, it's been great to experience all sorts of different climates, and our trip to Japan was no different. So for our itinerary, we were there from late July to very early September. We started in Tokyo for about 5 days and then made our way over to Tottori Prefecture, which is the least populated prefecture in all of Japan. Then we went down to a small town in Hyogo Prefecture called Tamba Sasayama, which is a ceramics village, one of the 7 historic ancient ceramic villages of Japan. And then from there took some smaller trips to Awaji Island, which is just north of Shikoku, and Kyoto on our way back to the US. So yeah, it was full of all sorts of different varied experiences, as you'll be able to see throughout the presentation.
And if you put two plant people in a new country, you're obviously gonna get a lot of plant pictures, and we learned a lot of new plants. So during our presentation today, we'll be highlighting some of those plants that we learned with our plant profiles, where we'll talk about what makes them unique, the habitat where we found them. And a lot of these are native to East Asia and to Japan where we were, and they're also plants that we see in our gardens here at home. So there I'm posing with Arachnoides sandicii in Mount Dyson, which we'll talk about later on. It's a really great plant. It's also one of our plant profiles. So to get us started, we began in Tokyo. That's where we flew in, and we spent about 5 days there. And Tokyo is a really incredible mix of modern urban energy and peaceful green spaces where you can find them. So during our time, we spent and found a lot of nice gardens to visit. So we'll highlight those here today. But it was just amazing how just steps away from busy populated areas, there were these quiet green spaces that you can find. It was wonderful to see the balance that people that live in Tokyo find between urban areas and nature. Like even that photo itself is a perfect example. We saw so many planters and just natural little spaces that people create in these little corners of a really busy city. So our first garden is Hamarikyu Gardens. It set the tone for how nature and design come together in Tokyo. So this garden sits along a waterfront surrounded by tall buildings. And yet, even though it's in the heart of the city, it feels incredibly peaceful. Once you step inside, it kind of goes away. And you can see me there on the right next to an Erythrina christogallii. It's a beautiful red flowering tree native to South America. So this was a more ornamental garden. There were some Japanese native plants, but it is still a botanic garden. So they had some non-native plants. But like I said, this was a really great mix of traditional design and modern surroundings. So there to the left is the view of a walkway and an open lawn with the city skyline rising just behind it. So again, that striking mix of the calm nature framed by the modern glass towers. And like I said, it's like really you can see you're stepping into a more peaceful area. And then on the right is a hill that you kind of climb up and you see a view of the lawn area and of the city itself. And again, this part of the garden, because it was quite large and there were several areas, this part was the more formally maintained part with the very perfectly clipped shrubs and the pines in the back. And there you can see Ben after having climbed this very tall hill and making his claim of the Tokyo area. And then these two photos just highlight the Pinus thunbergii, the Japanese black pine, which is the signature tree of this garden and really of Japan when we discovered it. From a distance, you can see its rough, dark bark and the way that the branches twist in the dramatic shape. And that's due to the extreme pruning, which this plant can take. It's pretty resilient. And then there on the right, you see the beautiful needles that grow in pairs, big, long, and slender with a bright green color. And so for our first plant profile, we have Quercus acuta, the Japanese evergreen fern. Japanese evergreen oak. And this is a unique oak because it's adapted to subtropical and warm temperate climates in East Asia, native to Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and China. It's different from most oaks because it's evergreen and it has these thick leathery leaves that remain on the plant year round, and they have a beautiful dense canopy. They form in their natural environments, and like a lot of other oaks, their wood is hard grained and is preferred choice for Japanese martial arts practice weapons. So it's a really interesting plant that we saw at this first garden.
Oh no.
Next, moving right along to Shinjuku Gyoen. This is, I'm sure many of you have heard of Shinjuku. It's a very popular neighborhood of Tokyo. And this garden is about 144 acres right in the heart of it. So it's pretty unusual. I guess the only equivalent I can think of is Central Park to such a metropolitan area with such great acreage of natural green space. So there were numerous styles in this garden. It was very diverse. I mean, there was a conservatory, kind of more Western style gardens, and then obviously some of the more traditional Japanese style, like you can see on the left-hand side. And then the right-hand side is just a picture of the conservatory, which we'll explore in just a minute. So on the left hand, we have a platanus allée. This is kind of as you first enter the garden. So that this is kind of to show the more Western style. There was just to the left-hand side of this picture, there's a pretty extensive rose collection, a beautiful rose garden. And was looking a little bit tired in the heat of summer, but nonetheless, it was all very lovely. And then we have a cluster of pines here on the right-hand side, showing more of that traditional Japanese style. And our next plant profile is Litsea japonica, which Abby and I both came across kind of at the same time, and we're both like, what is that? So we looked it up, and it has this tomentose underside, so very fuzzy leaf underside, and then it kind of curls up around, so you can see that tomentose just around the margin of the leaf, which is very lovely. It's an aromatic shrub native to Japan, China, and Taiwan. It has blackberries, and it is valued for essential oils, which I thought was pretty interesting. So just another beautiful shrubby plant, had a really great habit. They're moving over to the conservatory area, where we saw there's a diverse smattering of species, many not native to Japan, many not even native to East Asia. So they got to explore a lot of different genera. So we have Nelumbo or lotus, which is very prized in East Asian cultures in general, connected to a lot of religious practices. And then once you make it inside, there's this large specimen of Platycerium bifurcatum, which is a favorite for many. There was an arid section with a kind of serious, I assume, Grusonii. And yeah, so that, as you can see, even in the background, there's tropicals kind of mixed in with the succulents and more arid plants. So it really was kind of just everything thrown into one big room. There wasn't a lot of distinction. And then on the right-hand side, we have kind of an understory. So there were some larger tropical plants that kind of created made it feel like you were in kind of a rainforest overlooking some of the pond areas.
So we went from the arid area, and here the focus shifts to species that require more constantly humid conditions. So you can see on the left a mix of beautiful lush foliage plants, including Strobilanthes diarrhea, known for its striking iridescent blue-purple leaves, and on the right, more aquatic plants that seem to be thriving and really enjoying their space in the nutrient-rich environment. So we were able to see a lot of cool tropical plants in the greenhouse. And like Ben said, it was kind of just a bunch of plants in there, but it was fun to kind of look around and find what we saw that was standing out and interesting. And then after leaving the greenhouse, we continued to wander further into the garden, and we found ourselves in this forested area where we came across this huge grove of Taxodium disticum, the giant bald cypress trees, and seeing them like that was just incredible. It really was like walking into a cathedral. We had the tall Taxodiums above us, and then underneath them was these giant knees, and truly they were the biggest knees I'd ever seen. It was just really incredible to see, and we were there for a while. It's kind of just like in awe of it all. So that was a neat area.
And then as you leave the Taxodium Grove, you come into the much more formal Japanese style garden. So similar to what we saw in the previous garden, kind of rolling hills of perfect green turf, some very well shorn shrubs and pruned pines and other conifers. And then on the right-hand side, we have kind of a traditional, it's a bit backlit, but there's a traditional stone, naturalistic stone lantern, which is another characteristic of, or pillar of kind of Japanese gardens and Japanese culture. So they're often used as places to display offerings to the gods in the Shinto tradition, which is a very localized kind of Japanese religion, Shinto. So now we're on to our third garden of Tokyo, called Kiyosumi, and this was very close to where we were staying during our time in Tokyo. So we just got to walk right down to this beautiful garden as early as we could, as to try to beat the heat. So it was originally a merchant's residence, and then the founder of Mitsubishi, the I guess car company, owned the property to entertain guests until it became a public garden in the 30s. So kind of a similar story to a lot of the ways that kind of estate gardens up in the Northeast have changed hands and become public with hefty endowments. And yeah, so as you enter, there's a large pond feature that you kind of maneuver around through many different paths. There's lots to explore. I was especially intrigued by these large stepping stones that could allow you to explore further. And what else? Yeah, I guess I felt this was a very tranquil space, even compared to some of the other gardens that we previously saw. It was a little bit more on the outskirts of the city of Tokyo, so fewer large buildings, although there were still many. But yeah, like island features and just that's okay.
Do you want to go back?
No, you can stay on this
Okay.
one. Yeah, kind of these like trees overhanging the water, just a lot of very traditional Japanese style.
Yeah, so the ponds were really kind of the main focus here. They were used throughout the garden to sort of frame the spaces. And apart from the ponds and the water, there were also these more structure established spaces using stone and gravel. Like Ben said, the large stepping stones set in the gravel, I think, was a really nice way of getting you to slow down, look at where you're stepping, and really take in the garden, which added to the peaceful nature of it. And there were several areas, like the one on there where it was shaded. You were invited to kind of sit down, and it was really needed because even though we did try to beat the heat, it's truly impossible in the middle of summer in Japan to beat any heat. And throughout the 3 gardens that we've showed so far, they're beautiful, they're very peaceful, but we were soaking wet in sweat the whole time. So spaces like this are really nice and inviting to kind of just get a little break from the sunshine. And then similarly, again, further into the garden, other more calmer and inviting spaces that invite you to be still for a while. The moss and the maples overhead add to that sort of feeling of the soft shaded spaces. And I really loved the way that the gravel and the moss was catching the light. And then to the right is a monument called the Basho Monument that I thought was really wonderful because it has a haiku etched on it. And the haiku reads, "Old pond, a frog jumps into a splash of water." And it's just like a simple little poetic touch. I really like art and sculptures in garden, especially traditional artwork like that one. I thought was really nice.
Just a couple more pictures. There's a tea house here on the right-hand side, and then more of these paths that meander around the pond. And here you can get kind of an idea still, although I said we were outside of the main city area, there are still plenty of very tall buildings dotting the landscape, which just kind of added to the surrealness of being inside this historic property surrounded by hyper modernism. And then just a couple more traditional features. We have the kake on the left-hand side, which is a feature that often is used to bring kind of more a sound of trickling water to a landscape, just to bring in all of your senses, to further kind of the garden experience. It's a very traditional Japanese feature. We'll see in other Japanese gardens that we'll experience later. And then the gravel garden is another kind of traditional feature.
Yeah, so that was a few days spent in Tokyo and a few of the gardens that we saw. This was a very long trip. 6 weeks is a long time to put into a 45-minute presentation. But we moved on after Tokyo to Tottori, which, as Ben mentioned, is the least populated prefecture in Japan. So we had to take a domestic flight and then a bus and then a train to get there. And here we spent 2 weeks in the small village of Mikuriya, and we were doing sustainable farming work as well as volunteering with an organization called Sustainable Daisen that does work with the giant Japanese salamander habitat conservation. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. But it was really interesting, the work sites where we were. You could see there that photo, this big wall that we saw of Woodwardia orientalis. And we'll highlight a bit more of the work sites, but that was our first day there when we were about to start weed whacking, and we look up and we just see this spectacular wall of green. And we were just like, we're so glad we're here, because it's hard to see something like that outside of a botanic garden here sometimes. So it was really incredible.
Yeah, so these are some photos of our very first work site, the first day that we arrived. Abby and I were both able to drive in Japan. We got licenses to drive, so driving on the opposite side of the road was an exciting journey in itself. But we drove up from about a block off of the Japan Sea, which is where we were lodging for these 2 weeks, up mostly one-lane roads through clusters of homes and agricultural fields and forest, meandering up through roads that seemingly don't have names. It's just people know where they're going. So luckily we had GPS, which is very helpful. We made our way up to here and pulled off onto the side and proceeded to weed whack along this road edge for what felt like a very long time, but probably wasn't. And just to the side of that photo, there's a creek. So we were trying to gain accessibility down to the creek to do salamander, I guess, surveying. And then on this, I guess, left-hand side, this was our first peek at Mount Daisen, which we'll talk about more in just a moment. So we also had the opportunity to work with a lot of farm animals, which is a first for me. I'm not sure for you, but I gained a fondness for these little animals. There were 2 pigs, maybe not so little. These pigs were huge. 2 pigs, 2 goats, and about 25 hens that we managed over the 2 weeks that we were there. That's just kind of a fun little perk. And then I was so thrilled to see this plant profile, Lycoris sanguinea, on one of our day trips. So it's native to Japan and China, and the flowers occur obviously around the time, midsummer, around the time that we were there. We saw it on August 2nd, and it was just popped up among ferns and other kind of understory brush. And I guess after I talked to Tony about seeing it, and he mentioned that the straight species is like pretty difficult, or apparently hasn't flowered in our area. And I did some research, and it's potentially due to a lack of cold during our winter season, but could be for a number of reasons. And then we also worked with an kind of an organic farm that's adjacent to the organization that we were working with, but in return, we received large boxes of fresh vegetables that we got to cook each night. So that was another big perk, and you can see Abby there. Lots of weeds this time of year in Japan. They're very large. So it's a lot of work, but definitely worthwhile.
Yeah, so highlighting that Woodwardia that we saw, on the wall the first day the Woodwardia orientalis, or chain fern, native to Japan and China. It's a beautiful evergreen fern found growing on moist hillsides, so it does prefer consistent moisture. And I really love the large arching fronds. And what's interesting about this fern is that it grows when mature, it grows little hundreds of plantlets on the fronds, and just seeing that is really interesting because you can use that to propagate and get a bunch more plants. So that's something I would really love to do one day, but it was just great to see it out in nature too. And then these are just some shots of where we were staying. So there is the view of the town of Mikuria. It was really calm, really quiet, as you can imagine. Everyone that we encountered was very friendly and curious about us, you know, foreigners in this tiny town, but they were super open to having us there too. And the narrow streets were lined with shops and homes, and then just immediately on the other side, 1 block away, we found the ocean, just vast and inviting, and we saw a lot of beautiful sunsets right across from where we were staying.
Yeah, so on one of our hikes, we saw a cardiocrinum species, which was quite exciting. This is chordatum. It's native to Japan, kind of southern Honshu down to Kyushu and Shikoku, so pretty much everything but Hokkaido and Okinawa. It's also, like pretty much all the plants that we're going to highlight, found in moist woodlands and foothills, flowering around the time we were there, obviously. And so this plant has much fewer flowers than this Giganteum or Cathayanum, which I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with, especially Giganteum. So it maxes out at around 3 feet, but it has that interesting kind of hooded effect on the top petal, which I found very interesting, very different from the other species. Yeah, and so now we're going on to Mount Daisen, which I mentioned earlier. So this for me was one of the biggest highlights, was our climb. Daisen is a dormant volcano. It's just right up the coast from where we were staying. And it has one of the largest remaining old growth beech forests in Japan. And that's Fagus crenata as the Japanese beech. And the views were absolutely stunning. We had a lot of diverse kind of views throughout our hike, some clouds, some clearings, some kind of more enclosed areas, and then obviously these more striking open views.
Yeah, so like Ben mentioned, climbing up to Mount Daisen to the peak, the scale of the mountain really hits you as you're walking through. The view stretches for miles, and as you were saying, the clouds would come and then they would open up and it would be just clear blue sky, and it would allow you to see just how far up we were. You get a real sense of the openness of the landscape, and then up close we start to notice also the smaller details like the Anaphyllus margaritaceae, the pearly everlasting flower that would dot the trail. So the contrast between the vastness of the landscape and then the more delicate plants all around us was really engaging. I was having a really great time just seeing everything, looking up, looking down, looking to the left, saying, "Where's Ben?" Because I'm slow. I like to hike and take my time. So he would go up ahead of me and I would just be, you know, doing my thing behind him, but eventually be like, okay, I have to see him so that I'm not stuck on this mountain by myself. But it was just a really interesting and engaging time.
Oh.
And then our next plant highlight, I really like oaks, even though I called it a fern earlier, but this one is Quercus mongolica, the Mongolian fern. I mean, oak. I did it again. That fern's on my mind. So this is native to northern and eastern Asia, including Japan, China, and eastern Russia. And it's a deciduous oak with broad, deeply lobed leaves that turn a golden brown to red in autumn. And this is a species that plays a key role in ecosystems, and they are dominant in the canopy species of the area where they're native, common in mixed and coniferous forests on mountain slopes and river valleys, and it can grow up to 98 feet tall. I didn't put feet there, but it forms an open crown at maturity. And this one was just growing along close to the peak of the trail where we were coming up to a more open space.
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, kind of on the left-hand side, we have more of the early hike, which was scrubby, kind of more tight. And then as you look out, just some really great views of sheer cliff sides and striking mountain peaks overlooking the Japan Sea. Just all around really nice views. So we saw a lot of Hydrangea serrata, which is quite exciting. So in full flower for us at this time of year, just the hillsides were covered in it. I really appreciate the kind of tiered effect that it almost looks manicured. It's very impressive how nature can do that. But yeah, just another really great view. And this is another plant profile. So native to Japan and Korea. The flowers are generally smaller than those of macrophylla, giving it a more light aesthetic. And then, as I'm sure a lot of you know, the colors change of the flowers based on the pH. So more acidic plants or more acidic soils will give it kind of a blue hue, and then mid is purple, and the higher pHs will be pink. Rose in dappled shade, and here it was seen beneath kind of a sparse understory canopy.
So to the left is a picture of us reaching the peak of the hike. The view is opening up, although it was starting to get really cloudy and foggy when we were up there and super windy. But you can sort of see how the plants cling to the slopes. There's a mix of low shrubs, grasses, and wildflowers, really taking advantage of the mountainous conditions and doing their best to survive. But one that stood out to me was the tiger lily, because I love lilies, and because it was just a very bright and bold color against the green, and one of the only things flowering at the time. But seeing it up close, you really notice how perfectly it is adapted to those conditions and quite resilient, because we were getting really blown around, as you can see on the next slide. That was the peak, the Motodani shelter hut, which is where we were climbing up to. And like I said, the forest sort of opens up and we're here on this mountainous slope where it transitions quite quickly in vegetation. So in the lower parts, we were walking through tall beeches and the oaks, but then we come over to this sort of dwarf shrub zone. And it's a really cool effect of mix of ruggedness, and then we couldn't see anything. The view was sort of cloudy. We sat there for a long time and then it cleared up and we were just taking it all in.
Another cool plant that we saw was Rodgersia podophylla. So this is another great landscape plant that a lot of people use around here, but has that really great bold, almost like dinosaur food like foliage with astilbe like flowers. It wasn't flowering when we were there, even though it's like around the time it should be, but has a wide range. And here it was right on the edge of the trail, just ready for me to take a picture. So.
So then as we made our way down the mountain, the trail became wider and more shaded, and we ended in an old temple town path called Daisenji, which was where pilgrims have walked for thousands of years to reach this sacred spiritual space of the temple. So it's a really great way of ending this wonderful hike that was energizing and engaging, but then we kind of come to this peaceful end where you kind of just meander down and enjoy the sort of sereneness of what we just experienced, and bow down to the greatness that is nature.
All right, so I'll try to pick it up a little bit because I think we might be a little behind. But this was not necessarily directly plant related, but very, very cool what we did with these salamanders. So this is the Japanese giant salamander, a species obviously native to Japan. And we were able to take a pretty extensive expedition one evening with the guy who we were working with, Richard, pictured there. And so we hiked down about 2 miles to a stream bank starting at around 8 p.m. Because these animals are nocturnal. And then we hiked, or more like waded. We all had fishing waders on and walked up the creek for about another 1.5 miles in the pouring rain to see these creatures, and we saw 7 of them, some males and some females, and we used this white tube to kind of catch them and do all sorts of different things with them.
Yeah, so basically after catching, we would measure and tag the salamanders if they hadn't been tagged before. And then we collected data and filled out the sheets that you see there, which included things like the date, the location, the name of the river, water temperature, and then physical characteristics of the animal, like length, weight, and any distinguishable markings. So Richard has been doing this pretty much by himself for years, and the organization is called Sustainable Dyson. Really great organization that's doing really great work to protect these animals. And then that picture there was during our night hike. So I wanted to highlight Arachnoides standishii, the upside down fern, native to East Asia, Japan, China, and Korea. And we found it right where it likes to grow, moist ground in mountains, common in cryptomeria forests, which is where we were. And it's a beautiful evergreen fern that has that arching fronds, and I really like the lacy, delicate fronds that create a really nice effect. Usually I like to use them in containers, but they're also ideal in our climate for woodland gardens, shaded borders, or for planting underneath trees. So then moving on, after our time with the salamanders, we got to spend more time at more gardens. So this one is Adachi Museum of Art. It is a museum renowned for its artwork as much as it is for its gardens. It is known for combining modern Japanese art with traditional garden design. So this is a viewing garden. It was the first, and I think maybe not the only one, but the first garden that we visited that we couldn't actually walk up to the plants and touch them and ID them. So it was a really interesting experience for us both as gardeners. But the museum was founded by Adachi Zenko, and he believed that a garden should be viewed like a painting. So here in this image, you see that standing there, he really meant it. He kind of made the windows act like frames, turning the landscape into art. And they are taken care of so meticulously that they really are pieces of artwork. So the gravel, the pines, and the moss, and all the rocks line up perfectly. They look like almost like brush strokes of paintings. The balance of textures and the depth is so refined that I thought even the shadows looked intentional. And they probably were. I mean, they are a very intentional culture. So this was a place where you really see that come to life. And it's completely still in this space, yet it feels like there's so much movement as your eyes travel through it. This is one of the most perfect views of the garden, in my opinion, because it encompasses so many elements. It has the water and the gravel, the shrubs, the pines, everything is just wonderful. And this view changes as the seasons change. So we were there in the late summer, but they were playing a video inside of the museum that showed the garden throughout the seasons. And it's just spectacular, the fall colors, and then the snow that cover it, and then the flowers in the spring. It really is a beautiful place.
Yeah, so I mean, this was a big juxtaposition from our previous time kind of hiking up very rainy creeks to this like perfectly manicured landscape, which might have added to kind of its majesty and how we experienced it. But yeah, I mean, Abby mentioned kind of all of the features of the garden. Obviously, Acer palmatum is the Japanese maple is big in the culture and obviously used a lot in this arboretum, along with many other gardens in the US. And yeah, just some more kind of lovely pictures of the garden. More pictures of Adachi. Kind of those like perfectly shorn round hedges mixed with the more open canopies of other conifers and larger trees was quite lovely. And then this has been for 22 consecutive years named the best #1 garden in all of Japan. So they were very proud to share that since 2003. And I mean, I can see why. Very, very beautifully maintained.
Yeah, and what's really impressive here is how the garden blends into the scenery beyond it. So the hills in the distance are actually outside of the museum grounds, but they were framed so carefully with the rest of the garden that you felt like it was part of the design. And that's intentional. That's the idea of the borrowed landscape, using what's already there to extend the view and to create depth. And I think that was done really wonderfully, especially with the waterfall in the background. You can't really see it in this picture, but it's a waterfall that you think is on the grounds. But when we were driving, we saw it was across the street, but you didn't, it actually was man-made for that purpose, which is really interesting. So when looking in from the distance, you don't notice sort of where the garden ends and the natural landscape begins. And it's in this connection between what's made and what's already there, what's natural, that creates a really beautiful balance. Despite the perfectly sheared shrubs and the perfectly placed gravel patterns, you still feel like it's a part of nature somehow. So again, precision in every element, you can really see it in this photo. The gravel is raked in a pattern and it kind of guides your eyes across the space. And then the shrubs and the pines add that texture and depth. And then the tea house peeking out in the corner gives some sort of humanness to the scale of this picture.
There was moss, and we learned that, I guess, throughout the seasons they'll grow this polytrichum moss off-site in these large flats and then install it kind of like you would install a carpet so that it is always perfectly maintained. At least that's what it said on the video, although I guess you can see there are some patchy spots, so maybe they need to refresh a little. And then we love big trees. So we saw a number of really large specimens. The Selkova that actually had a location on Google Maps. Abby and I were just so intrigued by that we drove up this another 1-lane road to try to find what it meant. Because it just said like big Zelkova or something. Like we gotta go look at that. And then lots of large cryptomerias, reminiscent of kind of redwoods that we have on the West Coast here, but just some pretty amazing specimens. And now we're on to Tamba Sasayama, which is, like I mentioned before, an ancient ceramic village. And we spent 2 weeks here kind of enjoying nature and learning more about all the different crafts that go on there.
So the town sits in a basin surrounded by low mountains, and everywhere you look, there are agricultural fields, mostly growing rice or black soybeans, and they stretch out sort of in grids. So the picture on the left is of the ripening rice field during sunset, one of the first nights we were there. And then on the right is the picture of a late Oryza sativa, tall and heavy with grain, ready to be harvested in a few weeks. And then while out exploring at old castle ruins, we came across this stone wall that was weathered and covered in moss. And in the cracks, we noticed little plants like the Lepisaurus sunburgeanus or the weeping fern. And it growing straight out of a rock, but we also noticed it growing out of so many trees. They really find any space that's moist and kind of grow out of it in Japan. So that was super interesting to see too. And while we were in Tamba Sasayama, we did so many things and we went to so many interesting places, saw so many cool plants, but really we also met some of the most extraordinary people that are absolute experts in their craft. So this was one of them, Nori Sakaguchi. He's a local organic farmer that we spent the day working with. So here we are posing in his black soybean fields after a morning of weeding his giant taro plants. So we were pretty tired. You can see us sweaty and
so sweaty.
dirty. But Nori was incredible. He's a great farmer. He taught us a lot, and it was really fun to spend our morning with him. So we just wanted to include this photo sort of as a shout out to all the great people that we met in Tamba Sasayama.
We went to Kaibara Hachima, which is a shrine in the town of Tamba, which is adjacent to Tamba Sasayama. It was very beautiful as a structure, but what I was very much excited to see was this Lepisaurus species, Lepisaurus microphyllus, growing on all of the rocks and trees in the area. And this is a plant that I've loved for a very long time, and I've grown it in terrariums at home, but never thought I'd really see it in nature. But we were walking up to this slope, and I was like, that couldn't be. And then it was. So I was very excited to see it. It's an epiphytic, lithophytic growing plant, so growing on rocks and trees or other plants, native to Japan, India, Korea, and Vietnam, among other places, I imagine. So it's a dimorphic fern. So it has round fronds that are sterile, and then kind of more tongue-like fronds that are fertile. So I have a picture upcoming that kind of shows these more fertile fronds. You can see the two kind of long clusters of sori along those sterile fronds. No, fertile fronds, excuse me. And then we also saw Ficus sarmentosa amongst, which was a very interesting plant to see as well. And then another big tree. This was growing across a bridge. And I guess to the local people, it's kind of a big landmark. So it was very interesting to see this like huge root mass that was just like moving along across this somewhat large river. So we got some pictures of that. And then this is the shrine itself. We saw a lot of shrines while we were in Japan, shrines and temples. And just kind of the very ornate and beautiful structure that is very abundant.
So not far from the town of Tamatasayama, there's a trail that climbs up into the mountains to the ruins of Yakami Castle. So the first photo is our view as we were driving up the mountain during sunrise. Very worth it to get and do this hike. But then on the right is a photo of the stone foundation that remains where the castle once stood once we reached the peak. So it's a steady climb up to the castle ruins and in between paths that wind through dense cedar and oak forests. And then it opens up in parts to see the view of the surrounding valley. But right before the final ascent to the ruins, we came across this shallow pond with the sign that I pulled my iPhone out and translated like I was doing for every sign ever. And it says that it was where Princess Asagi committed suicide once the castle fell. So I think it's a haunted pond, and I thought it was super cool. But during this hike, we also came across this really cool colony of Edgeworthia chrysantha, the paper bush, which we all know and love because it's a great winter flowering plant. It's native to China and the Himalayas, so this was a sort of naturalized colony. It was brought to Japan in the Keicho era, and it was used, and I think might still be used, to make paper and banknotes. So it's found in partial shade and appreciates well enriched moist soils, which it had. It was right next to a creek. So several plants we found growing along this creek. The air was cool and the slope was shaded, so it was really perfect for their growth. And without the flowers, because it wasn't that time of year, the plants were defined by their arching stems and their textured leaves. So we were excited to see this growing in the wild. We not expect it because it's not native, but it was really cool to find.
And another cool plant we saw on this hike was Dicronopterus linearis, which I guess is native to Hawaii and other Polynesian islands, Pacific islands. I didn't really know much about this plant before, but it creates like very dense masses on those islands. And here it's just a small clump. So I'm not sure what the story is necessarily with where this plant kind of originated, but it has a large distribution. And it's a pioneer plant, so it does like low nutrient soils. And here it's growing on kind of like a barren rock area. So next we'll go to Awaji Island, which is just right on your way to Shikoku from the main island of Japan. And we started at this large kind of convention center structure that was built in the 90s that housed this Awaji greenhouse and another kind of more botanically focused garden. We spent most of the time in the greenhouse itself, but it has a very extensive history. I guess there was an earthquake that in the 90s that kind of was very devastating to this area. And they're trying to get tourism back to the area, but I'll talk more about some of the features that are kind of tributes to that earthquake. Yeah.
So the greenhouse was divided into different exhibition rooms. So here is exhibition room 1, which is a plant gallery that houses succulents, cacti, and euphorbia that enjoy arid conditions. And they're sort of displayed here like sculptures. Artistry is present throughout the entire greenhouse, including that piece of artwork that you see there called Jumping Gazelle, which was made from driftwood. So it was really nice to see artistry in this garden space. And then exhibition room 2, also known as the Garden of Color, for obvious reasons, showcases plants with flowers that have vibrant hues and bold foliage, so more tropical and subtropical plants. And they create this sort of feeling of walking into a jungle, which was really nice.
Like Bobby mentioned, I like Gisneriads, and this is a very cool Gisneriad that caught my eye. There was a garden exhibition room that was devoted to kind of Japanese plants. And so it was like a very kind of naturalistic garden featuring hardy and non-hardy species. But this species native to Japan, Taiwan, Vietnam, and China is Lizionotus passiflorus. Somewhat cool hardy. I mean, a lot of sources say that it's 9B, potentially lower. But despite the fact that it was here in the greenhouse, like I mentioned, there were aspidistras and acerums and other plants growing in the greenhouse, which I imagine was just for the exhibition and probably won't be there for long periods, but has a really nice white flower with those interesting purple streaks that kind of look like watercolor kind of coming out of the tube. And then these are just some other highlights: orchids, hibiscus, really any family that you can imagine. There was a lot of plants in that greenhouse to explore.
So here's another view of exhibition room 2. There's a lot to see, a lot to take pictures of, including the tropical tunnel, where orchids were planted in between real and faux aerial roots. So there were a few tricks up their sleeves because they did use some fake plants in places, which was interesting because they had so many real plants. I don't think they needed them, but from the wider view, you can see an intentional design that they used of stacking plants vertically. So they create a sort of enclosure and, again, depth. There's a lot of use of plants to create depth in many of the gardens that we saw, including this one. And then probably my favorite part of the garden we visited is this exhibition room 3, also known as Greenery in Daily Life. So this is a garden room that's pretty much themed for plants that can be seen and used in daily life. It was set up to look like someone's yard or someone's home garden. So it was based on modern day gardening practices as well as traditional Japanese crafts. So it kind of, like I said, creates a feeling of being in a residential space. So I did take some ideas home with me, some plant combinations, and just a lot of things that I wanted to experiment with. And this Ascananthus was really cute. We don't know the exact species, but if anyone can help us idea it, we'd appreciate it. So I was looking, I don't know what it is. But in this exhibition room 3, I saw this Tsuga diversifolia, the northern Japanese hemlock. It's typically found in cool, temperate to subalpine mountain forests in Japan. It's a beautiful evergreen conifer reaching up to 82 feet tall, and the needles are short, dark, glossy, with 2 distinct white stomatobands on the underside. It does prefer cool, moist, and woodland conditions. But I just thought it was a really beautiful cousin to our native hemlock.
Just highlighting a couple more interesting plants. This Astrophytum species was pretty cute. I just enjoyed that it was such a perfect star shape. And it was among many other, I guess, arid loving plants. And then just a couple more. campanula species, and then just like another smattering of color, bromeliads and anthuriums and all sorts of different things. So this, going back to what I was mentioning about the convention center before, this is called the 100-stepped garden, and each one of these 100 plots are planted with a different species within the Asteraceae family. And it is a tribute to that earthquake that I mentioned before, when this whole convention center was being built. So that earthquake happened mid-construction, and then he redesigned this portion kind of as a tribute, which I thought was quite interesting. It's very massive in scale and a big kind of juxtaposition to the natural landscape around it. Just like a lot of concrete, just super unusual, interesting design. And then that follows through to these large buildings. Abby and I got extremely lost in this place. Trying to figure out where the heck to go was very confusing. But it was, and also, like I mentioned, the tourism in this area has been down since the earthquake. So there was actually very few other people around. So it was a bit liminal being surrounded by all of this concrete. It was like almost, yeah, I don't know, very dystopian almost, but very unique experience. And then looking out in one of the previous pictures, you're just looking over the sea, which is quite lovely.
So then also in Awaji Island is the Honpukuji Water Temple, which was designed by the same person that did the previous garden, Tadao Ando. It is a special head sanctuary designed to be under an enormous reflecting pond planted with hundreds of water lilies. So here we see the view from the outside and above the temple looking down towards the entrance. And then you see the striking red walls of the entrance. No photos were allowed inside of the temple, but it is really striking, the red and the vibrant colors that followed throughout. So here's a closer look at that reflection pond that sits directly on top of the main hall of the so-called water temple. And then here, again, no photos were allowed inside, so I really just had to work with what I had for my own photo taking experience. But you sort of follow a labyrinth structure inside of, when you go down, it's kind of a labyrinth that goes around and into the middle of the main hall, where there are statues of Buddha displayed, and one of them specifically is the Amida Buddha, the Buddha of immeasurable light and life. So we sat there and sort of took it all in, and it was a really beautiful experience, not only to see the temple, but also to see such a unique structure of the reflecting pool. And so this is walking back to our car, setting back down on a downhill path, crossing the temple garden and cemetery. And even here in this sort of remote island setting, we saw a few workers meticulously pruning and cleaning the space, keeping everything tidy. It's very important in Japanese culture to have that sort of tidiness, especially in a sort of holy spiritual place such as that. So that was really neat to see too. So finally, we have arrived at the last leg of our trip, at least in terms of this presentation. There's a lot we kind of didn't go over, but our time in Kyoto was brief, but lived up to the expectation of being serene and historic. And this photo was taken near one of Kyoto's most well-known areas. So it was full of historic shopping alleys, and that was actually the view up towards a quiet area. So we were on a very touristy street, and I look to my left and I see that quiet little staircase inviting me to go be away from the touristy area. So we went up there and it was beautiful. It led to an eclectic handcrafted store. So it was nice that we were able to see that. But moving into our Kyoto time, we went to Zanzen-in Temple, which is a temple and garden tucked away into the mountains just outside of Kyoto. So we took a bus and walked to reach the temple, and it's renowned for its moss-covered gardens and tranquil ponds, as you can see here, as well as their little statues that are lined throughout the garden. So the gardens of Zanzen-in include several large, expansive areas of ground covered in vibrant green moss, and they're framed by these tall cedars and maples. So the moss has this sort of soft green carpet effect, and although we visited in late summer, I really can imagine the combination of the fall colors from the trees contrasting with the moss is spectacular. And I can't wait to go back to Japan in the fall.
And then just highlighting a couple more features, we have that kake feature again. And then just some more beautiful garden scenes. Some islands, I mean, just a lot of similar kind of design that we've seen throughout the presentation. I did want to mention that we heard that I guess one design feature is in hardscaping in Japanese gardens is that the formality of the hardscapes will go from most formal near the home to least formal the farther you go out into nature. So you'll start with a full 2-foot wide path by the house, and then by the time you get to the edge of the garden, it might just be very rough kind of stepping stones or gravel. So that was an interesting kind of design feature that I had never heard of before. And then our final plant profile is Polytrichum formosum. I thought I'd just highlight a moss since there are many species throughout this garden. This plant has a very wide native range, but found kind of near stream banks and things of that nature. This was taken with kind of our macro lens camera, so this is extremely up close, but it creates pillowy masses. And I think that is just the kind of what this garden is known for is the moss. And seeing how well maintained the moss was and how long it takes in order to create that beautiful green mass that is so uniform and strong was kind of just added to the kind of majesty of that space. So yeah.
So there was a lot of depth and richness again in this garden, even as you sort of traveled away from the more moss covered areas. So I think the layering of moss, the water from the ponds and the streams, the rocks, and the architecture of the temple grounds themselves, including details like that red bridge, really created an immersive experience. It was a lot bigger than I anticipated going into it. So there was so much space to explore. And because it's a temple and because I am of that mindset, it was a very sort of serene and calming experience. It really left me feeling at ease. And it was towards the end of our trip. So it was kind of a moment to reflect on the last 6 weeks that we had experienced. So 2 other views from the garden at a distance and up close. So to the left is the viewing garden that is seen from a veranda. You can't really walk in that space. And then to the right is a liriope flower, kind of a beautiful little reminder of home. We have so much liriope here too. And so these are the small figurines that I was talking about in the first slide of this temple garden. They can be found just peeking up and through the moss throughout the whole space, and I really loved seeing them. And so the second photo is just a sunlit stone path, like I said before, our journey coming to an end and being really reflective at the last 6 weeks that we got to spend together and learn so much and do so much. And it really was a dream that we came up with while we were at Longwood. I was just like, want to go to Japan? He's like, yeah. I was like, we're gonna go. And we did, and I'm very grateful that we were able to do it together, but also share it with you all today. So thank you very much.